All right, welcome back to the third talk. There are many ways to build a career in games, and we're now focusing on three common pathways in Australia. You either join a larger studio, you build your own indie studio, or you work as a contractor. So if you were starting again today, how would you approach each of those paths? Joining me for this panel are Sylsien Harding, who is software engineering manager at Riot in Sydney. Aiden Gyory, founder at Catalyst Games, and last but certainly not least, Morgan Jaffit, veteran developer and one of the pillars of the Australian games industry. Thank you so much for joining us today. And look, let's get straight into it. Let's start with you, Aiden. Why have you chosen the indie path? The probably hardest of all, without wanting to spoil this, but
Oh yeah, I'm absolutely just crazy. I'm pretty sure. No, I'm very excited about starting new things. Here in Adelaide, we have quite a small but quite a strong community, and it's always been a passion of mine to support and enable others. So yes, Adelaide represent. The reason for starting an indie studio is to help build more IP here in South Australia with more talented people. So that's the core focus.
is this something that's sometimes misunderstood about your career path?
Yeah, heaps of stuff. I mean, a lot of it, I think, especially for indies, we have a lot of those really big stories around like, oh, we just like coded away in our basement for like 7 years and now we have this amazing product and, all that sort of stuff. I think there is a small misrepresentation that is the path. Whereas, kind of what we're focused on is more on the sustainability side. So, how can we build jobs? How can we build careers? And how can we build pathways for other people into the industry? So, yeah, that's probably the thing that's the most misrepresented is how hard it actually is to do those big crazy things. But that doesn't mean there's not a lot of opportunity here.
Does that come with skills you may not have explored during your student time? I don't know, business activity statements, paying super, that kind of thing. Were there any things that came as a big surprise?
Oh, absolutely. Probably just the people management side has been one of the biggest things about starting an indie studio. Yeah, believe it or not, you have to work with people, and working with people is one of the hardest things that you can do. There's a couple of great talks that have already been through about how to communicate and how to interact with your teams. And I think starting out as an indie, it's a really steep learning curve. We all make a lot of mistakes, but I think it's all kind of failing forward. So yeah, a lot of communication, a lot of working with people, and a lot of trying to make everything work for everybody that's involved.
So seeing you're working at the other end of town, metaphorically speaking, you're at Riot. So if I wanted to work for Riot, or another AAA studio, what should I be doing before I even apply? How does that differ from the indie part?
Um, yeah, so I'll probably focus on internships, sort of looking at like that's the main pathway for graduates in. So it is quite competitive. We don't have that many spots for internships, so you might not get it first go. So just sort of set that expectation with yourself that it's okay. Um, but I would really suggest like understanding what the org is looking for. So read the ad really carefully. We'll see what kind of skills they're looking for, what kind of systems they're going to be interacting with, and what area interaction with players is going to be, and then research the company, what they value, understand what like so for example, I guess Riot Games really values like connection with players, right? So understanding that that's a big part of it as well. I can rattle up a whole list, but basically like hone your skills and make sure you really call that out in your application when you do actually get to the point of applying and tailor that to the job ad.
How important is a good portfolio?
Um, I think it's helpful. I think it's make sure that if you do have a portfolio and you're calling out in your resume the projects that you've worked on, I would really suggest like talk about like what you did, what was the part that you
Hmm.
actually made, rather than the whole thing altogether. Because we're really trying to hire you, not the game. So yeah, make it really clear because then we can better understand when we're sort of screening against the teams that we have and what they need. It's really easy to sort of oh that's the skill match there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Just anecdotally, when I was working in education, we got some scholarship submissions that were to be awarded based on the portfolio, and there were some portfolios we just couldn't tell what the person applying did. They just didn't
Mm.
really spell it out, and that really cost them a valuable opportunity. Morgan, you've worn many hats. You've worked in studios of all sizes. You've worked in small and large, and as a contractor. And so, if I was graduating this year and I want to work as a contractor, I wanted to be a bit more independent. What should I do in the next 6 months?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I guess in Australia we have two sorts of kind of work for hire contractors. We have larger organisations like Keywords, which bundle together a group of people and work on a whole variety of projects. You know, some of those are enormous multi-year endeavours where Keywords is providing art support, code support, design and content support, all the way down to shorter tilts of 3 to 6 months. I think if you want to work with those sorts of groups, it's really important to know how each of them work and what services they provide. As an example, I don't want to keep bringing up Keywords, but Keywords do most of the work for hire in Australia of this type. Virtuos as well, and there are many smaller groups. But you want to look at what the group you're working at does. So some are super engineering focused. Their primary role is in providing engineering support. Some of them are effectively outsource houses like Liquid, where the bulk of that work is providing fully complete art through the pipeline. So you got to know what you do and where you fit in. These are, I would say, on the art side, these are great places for specialists. And probably, if you look across most of the dev that happens in Australia, if what you wanted to do was like high res props for big AAA games, there's not a lot of that work around. But there are some outsource houses that work through that sort of work. On the code side, it's much more important to be a generalist. You tend to be doing pretty jack of all trades work on the code side for these kind of organizations. In terms of the best way to prep, as I say, it's to know what you do well, be able to represent that, and be able to point to the examples where you've done that. And I think this is something I talk to early career people about quite a lot. What is the job of early career? Well, it's to get some experience in different environments and work out what things, how you enjoy working, but also how you're effective working, and then try and seek out environments where you can be really effective and enjoy your work. A lot you won't know until you know. So, I'm not asking you to kind of have a complete picture at the outset, but you should know where your inclinations are, where your tendencies are, what sort of things you want to do, and who's doing that sort of work.
You worked in studios of all sizes. Is there anything that Aiden and Sylsien said that really resonated with you? Where you're like, yeah, that very much reflects my previous experience.
Yeah, and I think touching on the competitiveness angle, right? It's even more competitive now, I think, than it has just about ever been. And I think it's very easy when you're a student to look around at the rest of the class and feel like you're doing pretty well if you're in the top 10% of the class. I cannot stress enough how much you're actually, competing against all of the other classes and all of the world and all the things that are going on. You really need to, the best people we've ever hired were people who were testing themselves against the world standard that they were looking at and trying to move up. So there's that element. And on the indie side, I think again, indie covers so many different sorts of studios, right? Like I've run studios with 2-3 people up to indie studios of 35-40 people, and I think it's important to know whether you're the sort of indie who's going to band together with maybe one or two other people, put in sweat equity, labor away, try and get a title done, and your goal there is to get a game done and hope that it brings in some money and lets you do the next one, right? On the other end, if you're going to work at an indie studio, that's a job, and that indie studio is a business and has to take into account all the things needed to run like a proper business. And I would always say, like, never let the latter treat you like you're the former, which is to say, never let somebody who's running a business let their standards slip as if we were all just people working together in your bedroom. There are obligations on businesses in Australia to run themselves professionally, but they're also just professional obligations there. So, but there's really good things happening at indie studios. It's a really good opportunity. I think it is a great opportunity to see more of how the sausage is made, because everybody in an indie tends to need to do a lot of different things. And the general rule I would draw is that the more you move from small teams to large, and sort of from indie to AAA, the more you move from generalists to specialists.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that's something we can explore a bit further in this talk as well. But one thing I wanted to ask the whole panel is there anything that students generally think matters that doesn't really matter very much, but also then on the opposite, what matters more than people realize? What are some of the blind spots? But also, what is potentially a bit overplayed?
I think your marks in your HSC probably don't matter too much. I think it's more about like the work that you've done, and then like that second part of the question around like what matters more than people realize is like the teamwork that you do at school. So I know we've all had those teams that are challenging to work with, but those are great opportunities, working together with others, resolving conflicts, figuring out how do you prioritize stuff against one or the other. That's like kind of demonstrating those sort of leadership soft skills.
Yeah. And I want to assume, Sylsien, for you as well, things like learning existing systems, right? You may be working in an environment where you have to work with an existing code base. That's not necessarily something that you may have been exposed to. Does that play a big role?
Yeah, definitely. So I know, like when I did work experience while I was still studying, having to navigate somebody else's code that had been built over like years and years, if not decades, was like big shock to the system. So just developing that skill of being able to work in a large code base, but also I think also navigating a large organization in AAA that like every day is like, oh, I didn't know that a team like that existed. So now I need to go network and figure out what systems are they responsible for, what should I talk to them about, and how should I check what I'm about to do with them. And you're sort of creeping out your network across the organization as well.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of networking, it's also something that the chat is currently discussing. I think, Morgan, that's probably something that would figure very prominently for a contractor as well, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Especially if you're getting your own work, which is a very tough business. I would, to having done time as an independent contractor, you spend about half your time finding new work and having meetings with people. And, networking is really the key to that. Like letting people know what sorts of things you're looking for is a super important part of that. In terms of things that students tend to think matter and don't versus the other way around, the most important skill that you can have is to not stop. So, like, it's really easy every day you're going to be working, unlike in an academic environment, which is defined and where the tools you're using are documented and defined. It is not unusual to wake up with a task that is, make this NPC be able to talk, and go, wow, the tool for this is totally undocumented. I'm doing what I think it's supposed to do, but it doesn't work. and I have no way of going forward and no formal recourse on this until my next check-in. Those are the times when you've got to like use your initiative to talk to the coder responsible, find out how it's supposed to work, run those things down. I think like it's amazing how much of game dev is doing undocumented things in undocumented ways, and then trying to make that work in a sustainable fashion that is maintainable and document that for everybody else as you go. Like that's a big part of the responsibility, even for junior work and most especially for senior work. The thing I would say matters a lot less. Like gamer culture is distinctly different from game developer culture. And it's quite important to know this particularly if you're quite online. Like I've been quite online for 30 years now, and well, longer, but let's not dig into my age. And the way that gamer culture has changed across that time, it's become quite oppositional to game development culture in quite a lot of points. And you've got to be careful that you're not, like, if you're somebody who's really enthusiastic about games, that you're not dragging that into the professional spaces you go into. You won't last long if you tell everybody around you they're a lazy dev. You won't last long if you tell the women and the diverse people around you that they're just doing woke bullshit. It ain't gonna fly. And I just draw a big line under that because I've had to have a gentle conversation with many of the people who've come straight out of their academic world into the professional game dev world to reinforce, hey, you're talking about your peers now, and you might think about the unconscious ideas, the ideas you've unconsciously taken on as simple and straightforward. They're not as simple and straightforward. Things are a lot more complicated. So that's a big warning for me.
Yeah, thank you. Seems we may have lost Sylsien, so while we'll give an opportunity to dial back in, because networking figures are prominently also in the chat. I mean, Aiden is as a prolific networker. Do you have some advice how to best get yourself out there?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And just to riff off that as well, like the soft skills part is such a strong and important part of the industry. Yes, there is a certain level of like technical skill that you need to understand. But as your organizations get better and bigger and you start to build into those more specialized spaces, it does really become more about how do you communicate with other people in your team? How do you manage up with your bosses or your directors and those sorts of things? On the networking side, the biggest thing for me is always going out and showing up. So showing up as much as you can to different networking events or playtesting nights, taking an active role within your community or your local industry, volunteering your time, or just kind of being somebody that people can go, oh, that person there's reliable. They're somebody that I can talk to about whatever my questions are, and somebody that can really help me to understand how to connect with other people that are around. I think it goes a really, really long way, especially for your credibility as somebody who's starting out in the industry, to be someone that you can go, okay, well, that person's always here. They always rock up. They show that they care about this industry and they care about the people in it. I want to work with them. So I think networking is definitely a big part of it. And I'm not saying go out if you don't have the energy to do it. Definitely rest, drink lots of water, all those sorts of things as well. But yeah, whenever you can, if there's an opportunity, absolutely go out, meet other people, and bring some friends with you so that, you're not feeling so alone when you rock up to those things.
Excellent. Sylsien had some internet issues. She's going to join us again in a minute. In the meantime, let's have a look at the day-to-day reality of working in these different positions. Morgan, what's a typical week for a contractor?
So the interesting thing about being a contractor, certainly in the way that I used to do it, is that there is kind of no such thing as a typical week. It's almost defined by the fact that you have different clients, different needs, different things that you're putting together. And to give some reference, I was both an individual contractor and responsible for kind of providing work for what started as 3 and ended up as about 15 of us from a contracting perspective. So yeah, you are having a lot of conversations with people, like a lot of first kickoffs, a lot of Zoom calls, a lot of outlines, just for people who are trying to explore what it might mean to work with you, or what it might mean to have an interactive piece to what they're doing, or what a bit of game design or development might look like in the context of their overall business. You're organizing the crew that you have, or your own labor, producing that, making sure that milestones get delivered on the regular, helping to define contracts, helping to outline upcoming work, helping to plan for the team the work that gets them to the key milestones as you go along. So it's a lot of production, it's a lot of biz dev, and it's a lot of, as I say, lots of cups of coffee with people. I took my son to GCAP last year, who's 14 and has a bit of interest in games. And by the end of it, he turned and said to me, he's like, "You tell me you work, but it seems like you just have coffee with your friends." And I'm like, well, some of that is the precursor to real work. And some of that is just me catching up with my mates. They are hard to differentiate sometimes. But yeah, so as a contractor, you're doing all of that and trying to fit in work. When I was an independent contractor, and this is something I recommend to all independent contractors, you need to make sure, in order to kind of make a living, you need to bill out at double what your hourly rate would be as a salaried employee, and you need to therefore fill 50% of your time, of your working time, to kind of come out and break even. I tended to be pretty busy, but I was often not busy. I was about 75% loaded most of the time, which means 25% of the time I wasn't loaded. You can spend that time stressing about how you don't have enough work to do, or you can get yourself away from the computer and do something different. And that's my strong recommendation to all contractors. It's not actually a very appealing way to work compared to having a job, unless you force yourself to separate your uptime from your downtime and take advantage of that downtime to work on other projects, do something with your hands, play an instrument, go to the beach. These are the important things. If you can manage that, you can have a really fulfilling work-life balance as a contractor. If you don't, you just kind of go in a level of background panic for the entire time, which I don't recommend.
No, but I have to say, having coffee with Morgan is a pleasure. So if you get a chance, please do so. Sylsien, in terms of everyday work, in terms of the day in the life, what surprised you most about working at Riot?
Probably the sheer scale of it. I touched on this before, but right, it's really big. There's lots of different organizations, and particularly where we are in Australia, right? A lot of folks are not here; they're overseas, so you can't even visually see how big it is. It's like this curtain. So yeah, having to navigate such a big org and how much your decisions can make a big difference on our massive player base as well. And I think sort of layered on top of that was the amount of agency that we're given as well. So we can put out any feature, but we're responsible and we own that feature end to end, and we need to do, make sure we do the right due diligence, make sure we get the right testing to put those things out and have the monitoring and all the live operations stuff that goes into it as well. So it's not the feature, it's just all the other stuff that goes with it too.
I'm a little bit mindful of time and giving people an opportunity to ask questions, but allow me to ask this one more question, namely, how do you stand out? And I'm also saying that with the view to something that we already touched on before, namely that as you move more towards larger studios, there is probably more demand for a specialized skill set. So, what immediately catches your attention and what immediately hurts a candidate's chances?
Yep. Yeah. So thinking about internships is quite competitive. We get thousands of applications. We're really trying to read through all the applications very quickly. So really calling out the match of skills between what the teams are looking for and what you've done in your work prior. And also we're trying to find like leadership skills as well. So not everything is like a solo project. You've worked with other people before. Yeah, so it's really whatever you can do to make it really clear that it's a match between what you've done and what your skills are and what you value and what we're looking for. And then in terms of what hurts is, I guess, not doing that. So they're not reading the ad, not reading through the application form properly. And so it's not clear to us what the match is. Maybe you can do it, but you just haven't called it out. And not personalizing your application for the role in the organization. So really calling out again that, what you've done, not just what we're looking for.
Yeah. Morgan, what's your take on that? Having probably
It's very
seen...
similar. You've got to meet the criteria, and you also have to work out how to exceed the criteria. The personalized element is really important. And there's a thing, just to talk briefly about pitching. There's a truism when you're pitching a project, which is if you've got an ideal partner, you don't pitch them first, because that will be the wobbliest version of your pitch. Like, you line up so that you can pitch 10 people, and you start with the ones that you're pretty sure are never going to sign you in a million years, and you kind of work your way up to the absolute, perfect matches. Interviewing's a bit the same. Like, if you're in Australia and you've got a particular set of skills and a way that you want to work, have your list, right? Like, have the list that at the top, you're like, my dream job is here. I get an internship at Riot. I get to do these things, and then work your way down the list and start by getting interviewed by your friends or by somebody who interviews people on a regular basis. Like, warm yourself up and warm up the quality of your cover letters and warm up your delivery at each step along the way, to give you the best chance when you're going for the one that really, really matters to you to pull it off. And you never know, you might accidentally get a job you really enjoy along the way. Like, the worst case scenario is pretty good there. And yeah, the thing I would say hurts is if you haven't played our games, if you don't know what we do, then that's a real negative. If you don't meet the criteria, if you do meet the criteria, but I can tell AI wrote it, I will put that straight in the bin, and I can tell AI wrote it. So that's if you didn't care enough to apply, I don't care enough to interview.
Yeah, fair enough. And I think, that's also something that's very important for Riot, for example, the ability to know the games, know the community. Actually, I'll add one more thing before we go to the questions. And it's a very succinct question. Namely, let's say you're speaking to a student who's graduating tomorrow, give them one piece of advice in a single sentence. Aiden.
Learn how to be resourceful.
Excellent. Morgan?
Don't lose your point of view.
Ah, very good. Sylsien.
Your next step might not be the most direct route to where you want to go, but it all contributes to making the best you.
Yeah, well, detours enhance orientation. All right. Look, let's have a look at some of the questions we got in the chat. I've seen one earlier from Otto, who is asking, do you have any advice for career switches that don't have game-specific work? For example, experienced UX designers in a field that is somewhat removed from gaming.
I'll probably let you guys have a bit of a longer chat about this, but one of the best things about indie is that it is about people coming in from all walks of life, all different career paths, all different talents, and how those translate over. So, like, my background is in sales, and so a big part of our studio is our marketing. So, we're very loud about what we do. We work very hard to make sure that people know who we are. It's not always the best thing, but that is part of the skill set that I have that translates over. So UI and UX definitely leans more into that customer relationship space, and you're probably quite good at like frictionless workflows or working on menus and settings and things so that they're intuitive for users to play. So it might lean in somewhere into the design space, but just having a bit more of a mindset around how those skills translate will very much help you in the indie space.
Yeah,
I guess I would. Sorry, go ahead, Morgan.
no, after you.
I guess I would kind of like break it down. Like if you had been working in the industry, you would have technical skills and then sort of an understanding of the space of doing this for games and for players. And so if we sort of break it down into those two pieces, it's helping to connect the dots of the experience that you do have and showing the skills, the technical skills that you have, and the craft skills that you have, and then that you do have play empathy and you do understand like UX specifically in games and things like that. So just help in your application, helping to connect those dots so people can understand better how you can do the job.
Yeah, I mean that's a really good answer. I mean, I love UX people for starters, and games like not a lot of people come through a degree with the aspiration of being a games UI UX person. That's a less commonly tread route. So if you're experienced in UI and UX and thinking about games, that actually puts you in quite a good place. We've in the past hired somebody from outside games in UI UX specifically, but they had done the sort of work that you were talking about, which is to say they had sat down and mocked up a bunch of this is how I would revisit the game flow for Hand of Fate to make it more UX friendly. This is how I understood the interesting decisions in that space and how I thought about presenting them. And those outlines weren't perfect, and you're presenting them to somebody who, in this case, had created the work they were talking about and understood it inside, outside, upside down. So it would have been very easy for me to be critical of it. But it was really good to see that they'd started grappling with those questions. And, I would always encourage people to join their local communities, join their local game development environments, and just to think about like what a couple of those small exercises might look like with developers. You can be like, hey, do you mind if we spend a couple of hours together thinking about your UX and like hopefully there's something I can offer because I come from that world, and hopefully there's something you can offer because I'll understand the affordances of games that I'm trying to work towards. That sort of collaboration. I mean, it's a big point to touch on, right? Like, most Australian developers are very friendly for a chat, provided that chat is not entirely one-sided. So if all you want is something from them, most people will still pick up at the call. But if you're like, hey, can we have a chat that's got some mutual benefit? Very few people in Oz will say no.
Absolutely. That I would really like to echo that point. It is an incredibly mutually supportive industry, and to a point where you don't necessarily find it in other screen industries. I also appreciate you bringing up connecting the dots. Just to illustrate that further, a little while back there was a shortage of producers in the Australian games industry, and I talked to a studio who hired someone with a background in project management in banking, and they said they were some of the best producers they've ever had because they were able to just get stuff done on time. So, there you probably have a lot of skills where you can connect the dots and that translate very easily into the games industry. So just, reflect on that. Look, I'm mindful of time because we have about 1 minute to go until the next talk. There are some more questions in the chat and some really, really good ones. Maybe the panel can have a look at that. That said, there will be the industry AMA at 12:30 during our lunch break because we are about to bring on board Caddy from Gameloft to talk about career trajectories. Look, Aiden, Morgan, and Sylsien, thank you so much for making yourself available. Thank you for those insights. We'll see you during the industry AMA, well, in the chat. So much appreciated. And we're gonna hand this stage over to Caddy now.
Cheers, everybody.
Thank you.